Book 1, Ramsgate to Adventure. Chapter 1, Death at Sea. It was 10:45 and Dumplings was late. No surprise there, but Mince was beside himself. 30 years as a public health inspector had taught him a thing or two about punctuality. Plus, he was a nervous traveller. They had plenty of time, he knew that, but one delay can result in another, especially with Dumplings. He took one last look out of his Camden maisonette window, and he saw a blur of colour and excitement coming into view. It was Dumplings. Thank Cher Almighty, thought Mince to himself. He went down to the door that was sandwiched between a nail bar and quick tan and greeted his good friend. "Sorry, I'm a bit late," said Dumplings. Mince was expecting an excuse based on the menopause, but instead Dumplings chirped up, "I was just trying to catch the end of tipping point and then I missed the bus." "I thought Mr. Udegawa was going to give you a lift since you have luggage and everything," said Mince quizzically. "Let's just say we reached an impasse and leave it there," replied Dumplings in a somewhat curt tone. She was a notorious man-eater, or so she liked to think. Truth was she had low standards and no inhibitions. A casual proposition at a bus stop was a romantic occurrence as far as she was concerned, although this was happening less and less frequently. The only thing that had got in the way of a 30-odd-year friendship with Mince was over a man. Perhaps in the end it was a good thing he was deported back to Senegal. But that was ancient history, and in reality, they needed each other. Dumplings still put in the odd shift at the Wizard Sleeve pub on Hilldrop Estate. She had tried a job in a local cafe, but she could not stand for long and kept getting in trouble for stealing food. A taxi took Mince and Dumplings to Euston Station, and soon they were enjoying a bottle of sparkling wine on the train to Ramsgate. They had just enough time to get to the station and get some snacks for the trip. Dumplings could not go more than about 10 minutes without a biscuit, chocolate, or something heavily salted, and it showed. She tended to put on weight in a specific place, hence the name Dumplings, which had stuck at a young age. Mince, on the other hand, was exceptionally thin. He had long embraced cigarettes and vodka as an alternative to anything that could be described as nutritious. His long career for Camden Public Health had made him wary of most establishments, but he did display some very inconsistent standards from time to time. He had been a regular at the Magic Flame Café, which opened in his block a few years ago. But that may have been more to do with his interests in Turkish men than for the cuisine. Without too much fuss, they were on the Super Saver ferry to Dunkirk. They had purposefully picked a longer crossing in order to make the most of it. The chances of them going on a luxury cruise were depleting by the year. This was the next best thing. Mince noticed someone acting suspiciously as they had embarked. He has the look of someone cottaging for the first time, he thought. He was about to nudge Dumplings, but when he looked round, he saw her empty a pack of quavers down her gullet. She ate like a pelican. There were some other interesting characters getting on to the ferry. A very well-dressed lady caught Dumplings' eye as she looked too sophisticated to be on the cross-channel ferry. She should be on the Eurostar in first class sipping champagne, thought Dumplings to herself as she munched on her quavers. They had a good wander round the ship, stopping to rest on the deck as Dumplings could only walk so far. Suddenly they heard a commotion and a woman scream. They leapt to their feet. That is to say, Mince uncrossed his legs and rose up in a gliding motion, and Dumplings rocked back and forth to create a bit of momentum to get her up. Turning the corner, they were greeted with a terrible sight. The suspicious-looking man that Mince had noticed was lying in a pool of blood. He had been stabbed and the knife was sticking out of his lifeless body. Dumplings looked at Mince and Mince looked at Dumplings. "This looks like another case for Mince and Dumplings, ace amateur detectives," they said in unison. Mince reached in his pocket to get his out-of-date health inspector badge. He flashed it at the crowd that had gathered, accidentally stepping on the body, before announcing, "I'm Richard Trevor Longhorn and this is my associate Louise de Sanchez née Eddingfield, better known as Mince and Dumplings. We are experienced detectives, and as a former civil servant for a major London borough I have self-appointed authority in this kind of situation." Dumplings looked at her watch. It was the one Mince had got her when he had saved up enough focus points. "We have been at sea for just over 1 hour, so we are now closer to France than to England," she announced confidently. "In fact," she added, "we will be arriving at Dunkirk in exactly approximately 42 minutes. "No one is getting off this ferry until this case is solved," proclaimed Mince theatrically. Mince and Dumplings worked the room. They probed almost every passenger on the deck and even managed to speak to the captain. The captain refused to drop anchor until the murderer was apprehended, explaining to Mince that they were in the middle of an international shipping lane. Dumplings interviewed nearly everyone thoroughly-ish. Although too posh to be a suspect, Dumplings asked the well-dressed lady a few questions out of fascination rather than anything else. The lady identified herself as Pam St. Angelo. It turned out she bought her clothes at Bond Street and not up Westfield as Dumplings had thought, and that she was on the ferry to take revenge on her philandering husband. Thinking nothing of it, Dumplings wondered if there was a chip shop on board. Mince had asked to see the CCTV, but the staff were not being very cooperative. Indeed, they kept asking Mince and Dumplings to sit down, stay away from the crime scene and leave it for the French police. "They are probably in on it," whispered Dumplings to Mince before filling him in on the passengers' accounts of events as they had relayed them to her. Mincing up and down for all of 3 minutes, Mince yelled suddenly, "I've got it." He pontificated to anyone listening, which as it happens was Dumplings, who had managed to get a bag of chips, and some van drivers who appeared to speak very little English. "You will note that we are on the deck of a cross-channel ferry," proclaimed Mince using his most authoritative voice before adding, "It is not uncommon for the deck of a ferry to get slippery. Moreover, the ferry is prone to sporadic bouncing due to the wave," he concluded as if being incredibly insightful. "I put it to you that this gentleman is an international arms trader specializing in large bread knives," said Mince in an even more pompous tone. "I observed the gentleman behaving strangely upon embarkation," continued Mince before saying with a degree of theatrical finality, "It is clear that he slipped and fell on one of the knives he was smuggling to France." On arrival, the police were waiting, only they did not seem too keen to hear from Mince or from Dumplings. They took their statements and contact details and said they could be on their way. It was only a short waddle to the place they were staying, which was conveniently located next to a lorry stop. "I wonder if we will solve a mystery now that we are in France," pondered Dumplings, adding, "It seems mystery and intrigue follow us at every corner." Chapter 2: A Thief in the Night. Dumplings had got lucky. Mince had not. They didn't argue in such situations, but there was a distinct atmosphere. Mince knew he should not begrudge his best friend having some fun, but he was prone to feelings of jealousy. Partly that she was having fun without him, and partly as he wished he was having fun without her. Mince was sitting round the back of the chalet having a cigarette. That is, if it could be called a chalet. It was more of a shed located behind a petrol station and next to a lorry stop not far from the port. Mince decided that if anyone down the Wizard's sleeve asked, he would simply say that they stayed in a pied-à-terre close to the sea, which was essentially true. Having gone for a hot dog whilst Mince unpacked, Dumplings got talking to one of the patrons of a food van. There was something of a language barrier, but Dumplings' select choice of words and hand gestures could not be described as subtle. After Dumplings and her new friend had turned up at the chalet, Mince headed out for a walk around the area. But it was late in the day and very quiet. Mince resolved to just sit outside and wait it out. It was midsummer, so light until late. He put his ear to the shed door as things had gone quiet. His timing was bad, as the next sound he heard left him in no doubt that things were in full swing and unlikely to finish anytime soon. Mince put his head through the door to grab his jacket, keeping his hand over his eyes. Neither Dumplings nor the man noticed. Mince made himself comfy on a broken deck chair, pulled the jacket over himself and went to sleep with a lit cigarette in his mouth. Smoking was something he could literally do in his sleep. He wasn't sure how long it had been. It was dark now and cold. Mince got up and went into the shed. He saw the figure of Dumplings lying face down on the bed. "Thanks, Cher, she is face down," thought Mince, squinting. His eyes adjusting to the light, he noticed a male shape in the corner, frozen. The man had been caught going through Dumplings' purse with a €20 note in his hand and a guilty look across his face. Mince raised an eyebrow. Mince tried his pidgin French, but on discovering that the man was actually from Birmingham, communication became easier but was not perfect. Whether Mince was a physical match for the man was debatable. Although thin, Mince was no softy. Growing up in Croydon had not been easy. It didn't matter, they reached a deal. The man could keep the money in exchange for a spot of pillow biting. Dumplings awoke about 10:30 the next morning. Mince was already up having a cigarette in the doorway. "Thanks for waiting outside last night," said Dumplings, adding, "I owe you one." On getting out of bed, she was surprised to see the man sitting on the deck chair also having a cigarette. "Brad was just going," said Mince, then saying, "Oh, and I gave him 20 euros from your purse." Dumplings looked at Mince and she knew what they had been up to. She knew that look. He looked smug and satisfied, like when he is able to smoke indoors. Brad said his goodbyes, although Dumplings kept insisting that she did not speak French. He left, walking a little gingerly. "I think we just solved our first French mystery," said Mince. "And what is that?" asked Dumplings. "The case of the thief in the night," said Mince. "It's hardly a mystery," said Dumplings with a mouthful of Pop-Tart. "In fact," she continued, "the biggest mystery is why he would agree to let you do what you did for only 20 euros when there is over 200 euros in my purse." Mince opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Chapter 3: An Excursion to Adventure. After a hearty brunch of rotisserie chicken for Dumplings and a menthol cigarette for Mince, they were ready for more adventure. They got chatting to a van driver who had stopped by the chalet to check the pressure on her tires. Mince was fairly confident that she and hers were the correct pronouns. Dumplings was less sure, so just tried to avoid saying anything that could cause offense. As it was, Dumplings' first, and for that matter only husband, Brewster Sanchez, was now called Tina. Dumplings had taken it hard at first, but on reflection she had known deep down that something like that was afoot. She had long been an ally of the BLT community, as she put it. She and Tina were still good friends, but Tina had moved to Solihull for work, so they didn't see each other that often. Sheila explained that she was on something of a booze cruise and was driving her van to bulk buy from a liquor warehouse near a town called Bergs. "Can we come?" asked Mince and Dumplings in unison, not even consulting each other first. Sheila had only nodded good morning to the strange pair eating rotisserie chicken in front of a shed next to a petrol station, as she thought it to be a strange sight. As soon as Sheila had said okay, no matter how hesitantly, Mince and Dumplings were clambering into the front of the van. They actually fitted in quite well, as between them they equated the size of two regular people. "We should warn you that mystery and intrigue follow us at every corner," said Dumplings as the van pulled away. Not knowing how to react and concerned that these two weren't the full shilling, Sheila managed a restrained "Oh." "That's right," started Mince, pausing for a second, then continuing. "Just yesterday we witnessed a terrible stabbing incident on the ferry, and last night I confronted a thief." "We think he was an arms dealer," said Dumplings. At this point Sheila was confused as to who exactly was an arms dealer and what that had to do with anything. She was just glad it was not a long drive. They arrived at the warehouse just after midday. "I'm hungry," declared Dumplings. Sheila knew exactly what she had come for and where to get it, and didn't need the odd couple tagging along, so it was agreed that Mince and Dumplings would go for lunch whilst Sheila went to fill the van full of booze. After a hearty lunch of pizza for Dumplings and half a croissant and a cigarette for Mince, they came back to look for Sheila. "I wonder where that person went," said Dumplings, still unsure about the correct pronouns. Mince and Dumplings had a good wander around the industrial estate and inside the warehouse, but no sign of Sheila. They described them to the man at the till, but he wasn't much help and pointed only to the door. Mince and Dumplings sat outside on the steps with a small crate of wine between them. "Well, this is a mystery," said Dumplings to Mince. Looking at the crate of wine they had got at the warehouse, as it was too much of a deal to pass up, Mince said, "And how in Cher's name are we going to get this crate back to the shed? I mean glamping-style chalet." As everything in the warehouse was to buy in bulk, it made shoplifting hard, although Dumplings did have a distinct bottle shape in her tights. Just as Mince and Dumplings were beginning to think up a plan of action, a van pulled up right in front of them and they saw Sheila at the wheel. It turned out that the warehouse was out of the cognac that she wanted, and she had had to go a little up the road to finish the order. It wasn't clear if Sheila was expecting to see Mince and Dumplings again, but she gave a sort of half-smile and resigned herself to the return journey. Not far from the port the van began to make a rocking motion. Sheila looked out her window and realized she had a flat tire. They stopped in a lay-by not far from the chalet where Mince and Dumplings were staying. Dumplings explained that she was an excellent mechanic, as her first husband, Tina, had once run an illegal cut and shut operation and that she used to help out. So, before Sheila could say anything, Dumplings was out round the side fiddling with a jack and a spare tire. "She knows a lot about spare tires," said Mince viciously. Dumplings was as good as her word and had the flat fixed, but Sheila knew that she would now miss the ferry. The cognac diversion, and now this had pushed her tight schedule to breaking point. "You can sleep the night in the chalet with me and Mince can sleep in the deck chair," said Dumplings. "It's okay," said Dumplings, then elaborating, "my first husband was a trans, so I have no issues sharing a bed with you." "I'm not trans, I'm just a bit manly," said Sheila. "Like Dorothy from Golden Girls," interjected Mince. "I suppose so," said Sheila, somewhat disheartened. "Well, I think you are gorgeous," said Dumplings flirtatiously, who had dabbled a bit in the past. Sheila pondered the situation for a while. Mince and Dumplings had certainly presented as odd and seemed to have no social boundaries, but they had always been friendly and added a bit of variety into an otherwise routine venture. Dumplings was certainly on the large side, but she had a certain radiance and charm, not to mention massive dumplings. Felling a mix of bewilderment and curiosity as well as trying to make the best of a bad situation, Sheila replied to Dumplings, smiling, "You're not so bad yourself." Mince made himself comfy on the broken deck chair again, trying to keep his mind off the logistics of what was happening in the shed. Dumplings had got lucky. Mince had not, but this time he wasn't jealous and definitely didn't want to have a go with this one afterwards. Chapter 4. An Inspector Calls. Dumplings walked back to the chalet. She had gone with Sheila as far as the ferry embarkation point, which was only 200 meters away. Now she was exhausted from walking back, but she had been determined to spend as much time with Sheila as possible. Maybe it was because she reminded her of her first husband, or maybe they just clicked, but Dumplings was now well and truly smitten. Dumplings opened the door with her trotter, balancing some takeaway coffees and donuts in her hands. She was braced for an onslaught of Lebanese jokes from Mince, which would make a change from jokes about the menopause, but he just grinned at her and thanked her for the coffee. They sat on the bed and talked about Dumplings and Sheila. Dumplings told Mince that she had got Sheila's phone number, that she lived in Sittingbourne with her mother, and that they were planning a date in Lewisham in a few days. Having spent the night on the broken deck chair, Mince nodded off whilst Dumplings finished off the donuts and a Mars bar she had found in her cardigan. Not long later, there was a knock at the door and Dumplings' heart raced more than normal. Could it be Sheila, she thought, getting up to answer it? Her heart sank to see a smartly dressed man and a gendarme at the door. Mince opened an eye, and was intrigued to see two male figures at the door before realizing that one of them was the inspector they had spoken to on the ferry. "You have come to tell me that you agree with my hypothesis," said Mince confidently. "We have come to ask you, Mr. Longhorn, some questions about murder," said the inspector dramatically. The inspector surveyed the shed. He didn't say anything, but it was obvious what he thought of the place. "Mr. Michael St. Angelo was found dead on the Ramsgate to Dunkirk ferry 2 days ago," said the inspector in a small interview room. "We have CCTV showing you staring at him as you got onto the ferry, and that shows you following him onto the deck," continued the inspector in flawless English. Mince explained that he was with Dumplings round the corner when he heard a woman scream. That he was only staring at the man earlier as he looked suspicious, and that he didn't know he had been behind him going onto the deck. The police would not entertain the idea that he was an arms dealer who had slipped on a knife, as Mince had thought, explaining that bread knives are freely available in France so don't need to be smuggled, and that the man was stabbed in the back. "So, I didn't solve the mystery?" asked Mince, crestfallen. Altogether, Mince was interviewed for 4 hours at the police station before they said he could go. Mince expected to see Dumplings next to the vending machines, as whenever they got separated it was a safe bet that she would find the place with seats and treats. There was, however, no sign of her. Mince turned on his phone that had been returned to him, wondering if maybe they were questioning Dumplings too. It buzzed a few dozen times. Turned out a bus leaving from outside the police station had taken Dumplings to a food festival in Vern, Belgium. It was just over the border, and when Mince got outside the police station, sure enough, he saw the signs for the special bus to Vern Voedsel Festival. It was getting late, and a lot of the festival was winding down. Mince minced up the main aisle, flanked by a mixture of food vans, places selling giant biscuits and the odd fairground ride. At a clearing in the middle, Mince saw Dumplings. She was sat on a picnic table talking to a Flemish family surrounded by used paper plates and chip wrappers. "Quick, get yourself some Belgium chips or a waffle before they close," said Dumplings on seeing Mince approach, adding, "and get a beer too, I think you deserve it." She looked at the Flemish family, pointed at Mince and explained he had just been arrested for murder. "I wasn't arrested, just helping them with the investigation," said Mince addressing Dumplings and the family. "Apparently I stood on the body and that raised some questions." The family spoke good English and didn't seem to be reassured by Mince's words. Mince came back to the tables with a small Belgian waffle for himself and a large Belgian waffle for Dumplings. He went back to get a pitcher of beer. "Let me get these," said Dumplings, reaching for her purse, which was in her cardigan. Then she looked down to the ground and behind her seat. "Where is it? Where is my bag?" she said in a panic. Dumplings usually kept her purse in her bag but had put it in her cardigan as it was easier to reach since she had been using it a lot today. "Is this another menopause thing?" wondered Mince, but thought it best not to say anything. They wolfed the food down, which is to say Mince had a nibble and then a cigarette, and Dumplings filled her pelican-like gullet with as much as possible washed down with beer. Dumplings retraced her steps and Mince went off to find the lost and found. The Flemish family stared at each other speechless, unsure as to what they had just witnessed. Dumplings asked the people at the sushi stand, the Polish dumplings kiosk, the curry hut, the pizza place, and a few other stalls that she had been to over the course of the day, but no luck. Unfortunately, most of the giant biscuit stalls and the waffle vans had packed up. Dumplings was getting upset. It was her lucky Care Bears tote bag, and it was full of Belgium chocolate too. She tried to think where else she had been and then remembered that she had had a ride on the Dodgems. She went over to the ride and noticed the car that she had been in was still off to one side awaiting repair. She went up to it and there, wedged down on the floor, she spotted Friendship Bear smiling up at her. Mince had not found a lost and found or anyone in authority to ask about Dumplings' bag. "There's probably nothing valuable in it, just a lot of chocolate," thought Mince as he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around and saw the man from the other night. "Brad!" exclaimed Mince. Mince and Dumplings met back up at the picnic tables, which were now almost totally empty. Brad had gone to get a beer. Just about the only stall still left open at the festival was selling Belgian beer by men dressed as monks. "I had some business nearby," said Brad, nodding towards a nearby trading estate as he took up a seat next to Mince. Dumplings looked at Mince for an explanation of what he had said. "He is not French," explained Mince. Dumplings still looked puzzled. "I'm from Birmingham, in England," explained Brad. Dumplings still looked puzzled but distracted herself with some chocolate from her bag. She had bought it to give as gifts, but she was hungry. "What sort of business?" asked Mince. Brad explained that he was a courier in the business of moving things across the English-French border in his van. Brad felt he needed to explain to Dumplings about the other night. "I was having a bit of a cash flow situation and needed €20 for diesel. I didn't think you would mind. I asked, but you were asleep," he explained. Brad got out a fat wallet, peeled off a €50 note and handed it to Dumplings. "Thanks for a wonderful night," he said to Dumplings, but winked at Mince. "We are here until tomorrow," said Mince, his eyes flicking over Brad. "I wonder if you would be interested in a little bit of business?" asked Brad. Brad explained that he had some packages that needed transporting to England and asked if Mince and Dumplings would be interested in couriering them. "It depends how big," interjected Dumplings, having finally attuned to Brad's accent. She explained that they had acquired a small crate of wine and although they had drunk much of it, the rest was going to fill out their luggage. Brad explained that the packages were small enough they could be concealed about the person. Mince and Dumplings looked at each other and asked in unison, "How much?" Chapter 5. Northward Ho! Dumplings took one last look at the chalet to check they hadn't forgotten anything and just to take a minute. She had needed this. She needed the holiday. She missed going shopping up Westfield with Tina. She had had a blazing row with Mr. Udegawa when he suggested they try it up the Rongan. It had also been nice to spend time with Mince. They had been friends since she was 20-something and had bonded when they solved their first mystery. The mystery was who was eating all the peanuts, and the answer turned out to be Dumplings, but it had been a bonding exercise nevertheless. They made their way to the pedestrian embarkation point. That is to say, Mince minced and Dumplings waddled, both of them slowed down by excess luggage. On the deck of the ferry, Dumplings explained that she had stuffed Brad's package in a fold of skin. "Not for the first time," joked Mince. "Where did you put yours?" asked Dumplings. Brad had given them each a small package to take to England. Mince didn't say anything but looked sheepish, and Dumplings understood it was probably in his special place. "Not for the first time," joked Dumplings. Dumplings had sent a couple of texts already to Sheila but had not got a reply. She was beginning to fear she had been given the brush off. Mince understood and said, "Come on, let's get a big bag of chips." "Each?" asked Dumplings. "Each," replied Mince. They sat on the deck in the same place they had sat 3 days ago when they had heard that dreadful scream. Dumplings shoved a fistful of chips into her mouth and chewed them with all the decorum of a camel. "I've got it," she said. "Got what?" asked Mince. "You said the police told you the dead man was called Michael St. Angelo," said Dumplings, pausing for more chips. Mince nodded unusually. He had a mouthful of food too. "One of the passengers I interviewed was called Pam St. Angelo," continued Dumplings, thinking it over, then adding with a mouthful of chips, "I think they were related. Come to think of it, she did say she was there to get revenge on her Filipino husband," said Dumplings earnestly before saying, "But I don't think he was Filipino." "Is it possible she said philandering or feckless or something like that?" inquired Mince. They agreed that Mrs. St. Angelo had probably stabbed a philandering Mr. St. Angelo. Mince called the French police and got a message to the inspector. "It's quite obvious when you think about it," said Mince to Dumplings. She nodded and remarked, "Yes, the police should have picked that up straight away. You would have to be an idiot really not to solve this mystery." "Still, we solved it, so that is another successful case for Mince and Dumplings, ace amateur detectives," proclaimed Mince proudly. Dumplings got out her phone and read the last dozen texts she had sent to Sheila. She also had received about half a dozen from Mr. Udegawa. Dumplings had really enjoyed her holiday but was feeling a bit sad it was coming to an end, and was feeling a bit heartbroken about Sheila. Just as she had put a crunchie in her mouth, her phone rang, and it was Sheila. Mince was hiding behind the funnel having a sly cigarette. They were due to dock soon, so he went to find Dumplings. She looked like a dog with 2 bones and was almost bouncing off the ceiling. She lost her charger, and we are still on for Lewisham, beamed Dumplings. Mince put his arm around Dumplings, as far as he possibly could, as they came into port. "It's been a really great holiday," he said, and went on to say, "The glamping-style chalet was charming and in an excellent location. Thank you for organizing it." As they got off the ferry, they spotted Mr. Udegawa holding a sign saying, "Marry me, Louise." Dumplings explained to Mince about the misunderstanding, that he only wanted to try pegging and not take her up the wrongen. Dumplings and Mr. Udegawa had some good times in the few weeks that she had known him, but all she could think about now was Sheila. "I'll tell him after we get home," said Dumplings to Mince. "Maybe we can still be friends, but let's not lose the opportunity of a lift home." It was a bit of a squeeze to get them and the luggage into the Fiat Panda, but they managed, and a few hours later, Dumplings was back in her flat in Prince Charles Court, and Mince was back in his maisonette above a quick tan. Dean's packages were decanted and standing in the sink in Mince's maisonette. Curiosity got the better of him, and he decided to see what they were. Dumplings had smuggled the larger packet, and on opening it Mince discovered it was some kind of ancient Egyptian artifact. He opened the one he had smuggled, and it was a small golden egg. Mince wondered if these items were worth more than the €200 they had been given, but he was a man of his word and didn't want to make any more enemies. He had already made a few enemies over the years, getting places closed down for food hygiene violations, and the blowback from that was a big part of his medical retirement. That and an intermittent prolapse. The instructions were to take them to an address behind the Whitgift Centre in Croydon. Mince had mixed feelings about going back to Croydon, which was where he had grown up. Sat on the overground, Mince considered the holiday and thought about Sheila and Dumplings and smiled. He got a text from Brad to confirm the instructions and then an inappropriate selfie. Mince smiled to himself again. It had been a great adventure. They solved mysteries and met some really interesting people. Epilogue. Mince went into the Wizard's Sleeve and nodded to Dumplings at the bar. She was perched behind the counter on a stool that let her reach most drinks without getting up. The clientele of the Wizard's Sleeve were not sophisticated, so she hardly ever had to get up to reach anything out of the ordinary. Mince splashed the cash and bought drinks for everyone in the pub. There were only 2 others in, so it was not an expensive round, and the Wizard's Sleeve wasn't yet quite at London prices. Mince told the others, who he had not seen since getting back to England, about the pied-à-terre close to the sea, the trip to Belgium and, of course, the murder. Dumplings, still glowing, told them all about Sheila. "So, you are now a fully-fledged Elle Dumplings?" asked one of the regulars. "Wait until you see Sheila and then see what you think," answered Mince. After about 30 minutes, Dumplings finished her shift and joined Mince with a pack of peanuts in her hands. "What time is the reservation?" asked Dumplings. "We have 45 minutes," replied Mince. "Just time for the others to get here, and then we can go." Sheila was the next to arrive. She gave Dumplings a kiss and gave Mince a firm handshake. Shortly afterwards, Brad came in. He gave Dumplings a kiss on the hand and a shoulder tap for Sheila and Mince before sitting next to Mince and squeezing his leg. They went to the Magic Flame in the same block as Mince Maisonette and had Turkish meatballs and kebabs. Dumplings also had chips. Unfortunately, they all got terrible food poisoning soon afterwards.